In this edition of Shareable Science Beyond the Blog, what's the impact of COVID-19 on children? And what's the impact of warm weather on COVID-19? Stay tuned, we'll look at the science. Welcome to Shareable Science. Science you can share. In the early days of the pandemic, one of the silver linings in the news that we were seeing from Asia and Europe was that the virus seemed to impact children much less severely than adults. As we begin to look at data that's come out of the United States, that assumption continues to be seen. So this is a paper that was published today in JAMA Pediatrics, and it looks at a population of hospitals across North America, and it looks at a specific window of time from March 14th to April 3rd and asks how many children were in pediatric ICUs across that network with symptoms of COVID-19. 48 children were admitted, and that actually was in a small percentage of the overall pediatric ICUs across the country. The data suggested that the impact of the virus, while not zero, is much, much less than what we see in an adult population. About 80% of the children had additional risk factors. They're called comorbidities. This was more complicated than what we see in adults: hypertension, diabetes, and obesity. Many of these comorbidities, many of these risk factors were because these children were born with anomalies that may have required additional medical needs. They were medically fragile in some cases. I think the important take home from this is that it does seem that the virus has a lighter touch when it comes to infecting and causing serious side effects from children. Now, a secondary piece around that is that we're seeing results from New York City, from other parts of the country, and really from around the world, that there's a small percentage of children that are infected with the virus that causes COVID-19 that have a very different set of symptoms. They actually have a toxic shock, hyperinflammation response. Inflammation in the linings of their blood vessels, for example, and in other organs. This syndrome has been seen in a handful of cases globally, but we don't have a good understanding of what causes it and what makes one child more susceptible to this form of symptoms versus the other more traditional forms of symptoms. So that's something that we've got to stay tuned for more data on. But again, the silver lining, the good news, is that the virus continues to show a less harmful impact on children. All right, let's shift gears. Let's talk about weather. This is a follow-on to the data from our April 16th video, Is COVID-19 Seasonal? And it specifically asked the question, if under hotter conditions, will we see the virus become less and less common? So this is a preprint that was recently published by researchers from Harvard and MIT, and they looked at data from over 3,700 locations around the globe. They looked at infection data, and then they compared the dates of the infections with the weather, and especially the weather in the days before the infection, which would be when individuals were first exposed, and the virus was transmitted to them. Their data suggest that warm weather above about 77 degrees Fahrenheit and higher levels of humidity may actually slow the transmission of the virus, making it harder for one person to pass it on to another. But they don't stop the transmission, and their data actually suggest that while summer may offer partial slowing, it isn't going to be enough to stop the spread. There will still be spread throughout the summer. Now, other papers from other groups have found similar findings, although the magnitude of these findings varies. Some groups find very little impact, some groups find slightly larger impacts. So I think we still have to wait. We may actually have to wait until we get into the hotter weather and see what that impact is. So that brings up an important point about the nature of science, especially the nature of science that we're seeing played out now with COVID-19. So this is the way that science often works. Individuals look at a question, they develop a hypothesis, they perform research, and they publish their findings. And other individuals respond to that and may publish similar kinds of studies or publish studies in response, and they may find similar findings or they may find something quite different. So I want you to imagine that each data point on this plot is a different research finding around a specific topic. So let's just say that this is what is the impact of temperature on the transmission of COVID-19. And some groups may find one result, and other groups may find something completely different or something that's only slightly different. Over time, as groups look at each other's data and come to some agreement of the way that they've defined their research experiment, the way that they've looked at the variables, we often begin to see that what may start out as quite different results begins to converge around a common answer. Now, that's not always the way this works, and sometimes it doesn't take a lot of science. Sometimes it just takes one or two or three before you begin to converge. But you often see kind of this oscillation as we move towards a convergence, towards a common answer. What we're seeing with COVID-19 right now is you've got lots of data that we're trying to get very rapidly out to our audience to try to make decisions on. And so you're seeing things in press release, you're seeing things before they've gone through peer review, and in many cases, the results are really widespread. That doesn't mean that the process of doing science is wrong or that we don't know what we're doing. It means that right now we're looking at the data that we can in the way that we can, and as we begin to come to some commonalities of how we define the challenge and how we analyze it, we reach a similar result. So some of the things around around COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, are already at this convergence. Other things like issues around temperature and transmission are still out here where there's a lot of room for difference. So you'll see more of this as we move through the next several weeks. Don't be alarmed by it. It is the way the process of science works. If you find this useful, please share this with others. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time. Stay safe, everyone.